McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 1, Chapter 2, Artist and Audiences. Chapter outline: Making art, looking at art, understanding art. Making art. The impulse and ability to make images are unique to human characteristics. Human beings have been making art since the prehistoric era. The Chauvet Cave in France is one of several cave and rock shelter paintings from the Upper Paleolithic era. This is the latter part of the Old Stone Age, the oldest being a pig that was in Indonesia around 45,500 years ago. The Chauvet Galleries and Chambers team, with over 300 depictions of animals and lions and mammoths and other animals, was named for one of the explorers who discovered it in 1994. The Chauvet Cave created a sensation when radiocarbon dating confirmed that at least some of the images on its walls had been painted 32,000 years ago, thousands of years earlier than the style suggested. Evidence from the Chauvet Caves gives a glimpse of how the paintings were made. Charcoal, naturally tinted red, and yellow clays and ochres, and black mineral called manganese dioxide served as pigments. They were ground to a powder with stone mortars and then mixed with a liquid that bound them into paint. Blood, animal fat, and calcium-rich cave water were some of the binders that were used. Artists applied the paint to the cave walls with fingers and animal hair brushes, or sprayed the paint from their mouths through hollow reeds. Some images were engraved or scratched into the rock, while others were drawn with a chunk of rock or charcoal. Deep in the caves, far from any natural light or living areas, the images were created and viewed by the flickering light of torches or stone lamps that may have burned off of animal fat. The cave and rock shelter paintings that bring us closest to their makers are the hands that appear in the Stone Age art around the globe. The Indonesian pig was accompanied by two handprints. Palm prints and stenciled silhouettes of human hands were found in the Chauvet Caves. The hands help us to imagine our ancestors, who once stood at those spots and left traces of their presence. The Cave of Hands in Argentina has hundreds of hands painted side by side and layered upon each other. Their array of colors remain bright today, despite being about 9,000 years old. To make the stencil silhouette, painters placed their hands against the wall and blew paint across it, leaving behind the unpainted shape of their hand. We see the natural color of the stone where the hand protected it from the blown paint. For the white images seen here, the painters dipped their hands into the pigment and printed it directly onto the wall. Some of the hand images use both techniques, blowing and printing. Making art and creativity. Creativity is a form of problem solving. Creativity resides in the brain and can be learned. Making art. The creative process includes preliminary work and execution. The artist's sketchbooks offer a glimpse of the early stages of the creative process. A sketchbook is like a journal where artists make drawings to record observations of the world and ideas for new works. The sketches may be accompanied by notes, as Leonardo da Vinci famously did. They may also include drawings of other works of art as studies for technical inspiration and information. Filling a sketchbook with drawings allows artists to test ideas, to practice their ability to represent the world, and to develop their own unique approach. The images found in a sketchbook range from incomplete sketches rapidly done to record a fleeting impression to fully worked out pieces on paper. A page of the Italian artist Giorgio di Giovanni's sketchbook includes this range. At the top of the page, Giovanni has quickly drawn a decorative pattern of interlocking lines, like the ones found in ancient Roman buildings. In the middle, however, the artist has carefully rendered and painted a moth in lifelike colors, while the cats and the chicken and the flower and the birds are somewhere in between. The artist Christo made preliminary drawings for the gates, a monumental project he completed with his partner, Jean Claudet. The pair placed 7,503 cloth gateways in New York City's Central Park. Each gate was a 16-foot-tall rectangle meant to remind viewers of city blocks. The artist placed these colored vinyl gates 12 feet apart along paths within the park. For viewers looking down from nearby skyscrapers, the gates looked like meandering rivers. For 2 weeks in February of 2005, visitors walking beneath the gates enjoyed the cloth panels waving in the breeze, just a foot or so above their heads and in the warm glowing light they created. Christo's preliminary drawings worked out the shape and size and arrangement of the gates. Drawings like the one seen here, paired with drawings of the gates or with photographs of the park. This allows the artist and the city authorities to envision what the final project would look like. A plan or a map of the park showed where the gates would be located. Text written alongside the drawings gave technical specifications about the number of gates and their shape, the placement, and the material. A fabric sample glued to some of the drawings allowed viewers to see and feel the cloth. Preliminary drawings like this helped the artist secure permission from the city, a process that took more than 2 decades. Christo and Jean-Claude then collaborated with a team of 600 workers to execute the plan. The installation of the gates provided an opportunity for viewers to see this step-by-step creative process. Mexican painter Diego Rivera showed himself in the act of creating a mural in The Making of a Fresco, showing the building of a city. That's the title. And in 1920s, Rivera helped the Mexican government turn walls into vast visual lessons in national history. His murals pictured indigenous cultures, the brutality of the Spanish colonization, the fight for independence, the heroes of the 1910 Mexican Revolution, and Rivera's own vision for a future shaped by the teachings of Karl Marx. In The Making of a Fresco, showing the building of a city, Rivera is in the center on the second level of the scaffold with his back to the viewers. He is holding his brush and palette. Rivera's assistants surround him on the scaffold. The painting likens their artistic labor with the intellectual, physical, and mechanical labor that builds the city all around them. In the bottom center, 2 well-known architects stand with William Gersel, who brought the artist to San Francisco Art Institute to paint the mural in 1931. They are looking at an architectural plan, another type of a preliminary drawing. Like the one architect Geraldine Kobe Fricke prepares in the mural's lower right-hand corner. Making art. Artists have trained for and engaged in art-related careers in different ways, depending on time and context. To the anonymous Hetiti silversmith responsible for this vessel terminating at the forepart of a stag, today's art world would seem strange. The vessel was made around 1300 BCE in what is now today Turkey. The silversmith prepared for professional life by learning from another artist, likely a parent or a relative, since there were no art schools at the time. Young artists instead started as apprentices at the very young age, performing menial tasks in a master's artist workshop. Over several years, apprentices learned how to handle the material and execute finished works according to the preferences of their community. At the end of this on-the-job training, apprentices either stayed with their master or struck out on their own and established their own workshops. The tradition of training with a master artist was common around the world, and it lasted for a millennia. And frequently opportunities to learn a certain trade were based on gender, but these rules could sometimes be broken. Flemish artist Catharina van Hemsen was not allowed to undertake an apprenticeship because of her gender. According to the rules of the Painters Guild, a professional organization that existed for centuries, young women could not be trained as artists. And the Painters Guild in von Hemsen's hometown of Antwerp barred female apprentice, leading her to learn from her father, who was a painter and guild member. She studied in her father's large workshop or studio alongside his apprentice and assistants, contributing to his paintings before creating her own. Despite these barriers, von Hemsen became a professional painter. She painted self-portrait at the easel when she was just 20 years old. Like Rivera's mural, the painting pictures her at work, holding her paintbrush up as she looks out at us. It is as if we caught her in the act of painting. She's resting her hand against a mahl stick to hold it steady. The hand holding the stick also holds several brushes and her palette, which is loaded up with paint. Like the Hittite silversmith, and like most artists of the past, von Hemsen usually did not create what she wanted to, but instead created what her clients or her patrons requested. These patrons commissioned or ordered her work, paying her a fee when it was complete, or perhaps providing some funds up front. Finding patrons was key to professional success in the 16th century. Von Hemsen was fortunate to come to the attention of a member of the Spanish royal family who added the painter to her entourage of artists. Becoming a court artist of a powerful royal patron was one of the greatest achievements for artists before the modern era. In this painting, which shows the emperor seated on an hourglass throne to symbolize the time span of his reign, the court artist appears in the lower left-hand corner. The artist is offering a painting to his ruler. He is in court attire, but is smaller than the emperor and the visiting dignitaries. Like the Oba in the benign plaque, the Mughal emperor is the largest and most important figure in the painting. The painting virtually shimmers with gold color and intricate details. Like other rulers, Jahangir wanted only the best artist in his service. Artists did not always work on commissions from patrons. Much art has been produced on speculation, created based on demand. The Virgin of Immaculate Conception, shown here, was carved by an unknown artist in the Philippine Islands. The sculpture represents the Virgin Mary and illustrates the Catholic doctrine of Mary's conception without a stain of original sin. Mary is pictured as a young woman standing with her hands clasped. The sculpture leans slightly to the left because it is carved from an ivory elephant tusk. The natural curvature makes Mary look humble with her head downturned. Glass eyes inserted through the back of the head make the figure more lifelike. Gold and silver contribute to her halo and the heavenly look. Sometimes making art is a sacred duty. This image in the book is called Navajo sand painting, but I actually want to change Navajo to Dene. Navajo was a name given to the Dene nation by the Spanish when they were colonized, and it actually means the enemy. And Dene is the name that the people made for themselves, which means the people. So in my reading of the text here, I'm going to stick with the name Dene rather than Navajo, which the text uses. Okay, so Dene sand painting is part of a ceremony performed by a singer or a medicine man who uses traditional, spiritual, and medicinal resources and art to heal and bless the sick. During the healing ceremony, the medicine person starts by chanting a Dene legend. At the certain point, he begins making the painting by shifting colored sand and plant pollen through his fingers onto the ground. The painting acts as a point of contact between earthly spirit realms. Together with the chanting, it attracts the spirits or the holy people. When the painting is completed, the patient is instructed to sit at its center. The medicine man touches the portion of the painting and then the patient and gradually transfers the powers of healing. While making and interacting with the painting are parts of the healing process, so is its unmaking. When the ceremony is over, the painting is swept with a feather staff into a blanket and carried outside and deposited safely so that it does not harm anyone with the sickness that it holds. Because sand painting is a sacred activity, not even photography is allowed. The photograph shown here is just a demonstration of the technique. Making art. The purpose of art differs depending on time and context. Much of the art produced in the modern age has been created to be sold. Galleries began playing a big role in the European and American art markets in the 19th century and soon became the cornerstones of the art world. Gallery owners, acting as art dealers, buying and selling art, are always looking for new talent and work. Having gallery representation is important for artists to attract the attention of established art collectors. Because the gallery takes a portion of the sale price of each work of art, it has a vested interest in helping the artist to succeed. Galleries, however, have not always included women and artists of color. Romare Bearden was one of the first black artists to have gallery success in the United States. After graduating from New York University, Bearden joined a group of artists in Harlem and immersed himself in New York's contemporary art scene. He soon attracted the attention of some of the city's most progressive galleries, securing representation and impressing collectors and critics, first with paintings and later with collages like Return of the Prodigal Son. Made from magazine photographs, paint, and pencil, Return of the Prodigal Son transforms the biblical story of a young man who leaves and then later returns to his family into a modern allegory of a black American life. In Bearden's reimagining, the son is not a male, but female with breast and a long skirt. Like the son in the biblical tale, she is embraced by a fatherly man, yet she walks toward and reaches out to a woman. Bearden's collage was influenced both by trends in contemporary art and by the Black American quilting tradition, and the art world took note. In 1965, the Coracan Gallery of Art, a museum in Washington, D.C., gave Bearden a single person or solo exhibition, one of the highest achievements in the art world. In the latter 20th century, some artists began to question the role of the artist and what gets lost in the realm of galleries and museums. In response, artists began to place their art into the everyday world in a form that could not be bought or sold. The street artist known as Banksy grapples with the issue of art and ownership, recently creating a painting that shredded itself shortly after it had been sold at auction. Banksy is known for the images he paints on walls and buildings owned by private individuals, companies, and governments, such as the one that used to be on the Lecan Street in London. His works, typically involving a stencil technique with spray paint for rapid execution, are satirical social commentaries. Looking at art. Looking at art is the interpretation of visual information, which is both objective and subjective. Seeing is a mode of perception, which is the recognition and interpretation of sensory data. In visual perception, the role of our eyes is purely mechanical, and barring physical disorders, they function the same way for everyone. Our eyes take in information in the form of light patterns, and our brains then process these patterns and give them meaning. The field of psychology has found some commonalities in the ways we perceive visual information. Graphic designers use these commonalities when they apply the principles of Gestalt theory, which is based on the assumption that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Our minds interpret visual information in predictable ways in order to make sense of what our eyes see. For example, we perceive that things located close together in an image or that are the same color or size are related. The letters in this poster for a bicycle company, Public, are located close to each other, and there are two large ovals. They also share the same thickness with the ovals, so our minds assume that they belong together and act as a group. We're able to process this group as a bicycle, even though the form is not fully described and the typical bike parts are missing, things like spokes and seats and frames. Looking at art. How art is made affects our interpretation of it. The mind's role in making sense of visual information, or the things that we perceive, however, is slightly subjective. Given the same situation, we do not all notice the same things, nor do we interpret what we see in the same way. One reason for differences in perceptions is the immense amount of detail available at any given moment. To navigate efficiently through daily life, we use selective perception, focusing on information that we need for the task at hand, and relating everything else to the background. Other factors that influence our perception include mood, prior experience, culture, relationships, and accumulated knowledge. How a work of art is made can also influence our perception and interpretation of it. In this work, created by artist Otto Dix, we see the portrayal of World War I in his series Der Krieg, or The War. In this image, we are confronted by the terrified eyes and the gaping mouth of a wounded soldier. Dix exaggerates the size of the eyes to emphasize the soldier's pain and fear. He also uses slashing, chaotic lines that barely come together, but just enough for us to interpret them as the soldier. The technique suggests that the individual is teetering at the edge of control. But each person may see something different when looking at this work. They may feel something different based on their own experiences. Some may find it horrifying, while others may perceive it as powerful, if painful, beauty. What is beauty in art? Does art need to be pleasing for our sense of sight? During the 18th century, beauty and art were discussed together because they were viewed as providing pleasure. Philosophers described the nature of this pleasure as an intellectual pleasure perceived through a special kind of attention called disinterested contemplation. Disinterested meant setting aside any personal, practical stake we might have in what we are looking at. For example, if we were examining a peach to see whether it was ripe enough to eat, we are contemplating it with direct personal interest. If we step back to admire its color, its texture, and its roundness without thinking about eating it, then we are contemplating it disinterestedly. In art, if we look at just the visual qualities like color, light, and shape, we experience disinterested pleasure. But is pleasure what we should always feel when looking at art? Art can produce pleasure, but it can also inspire sadness, horror, pity, awe, and a full range of emotions. The common thread is that in each case we find the experience of looking to be valuable for its own sake. Art makes looking worthwhile. Similarly, art can be beautiful, but not all art tries to be beautiful. And beauty is not a requirement for art. Beauty remains a mysterious concept without a universal definition. Artists are fascinated by beauty and return to it over and over again, though not always in a form we expect. Looking at art. Art can produce a range of emotions in viewers, and it doesn't have to be beautiful. Looking at art. Representational art represents things in the world. While Dix may have used sketchy lines to suggest parts of a figure, we were able to tell that what we were looking at was a human being, not a bunch of loose lines. On the other hand, the bread baskets, vessels, and other items in Antonio Perez de Elguera's painting The Cupboard look the way they do in nature. painting in Mexico in the 18th century, Perez de Aguilar rendered these precise details and textures and shapes, colors, lighting, and spaces of the items as they appeared to his eye. Light glistens on the glass vessels at the bottom. The bread in the middle seems to project toward us. The entire painting appears like a glass cabinet with its lock and key hanging on the left. The authenticity or natural appearance had been a goal of Western art since the Renaissance, impacted by new methods for making optically convincing images. From the time until most of the end of the 19th century, a period of about 500 years, techniques for representing the observable world of light and shadow and color and space, the technique evident in the painter's cupboard, were used to make representational art. The goal of representational art is to represent, or to present again, the visible world in such a way that we recognize a likeness. The word representational covers a broad range of approaches. The painter's cupboard is faithful to a visual experience, recording how forms are revealed by light and shadow, how materials and colors correspond to light, how different textures appear, and how gravity makes weight feel. We call this approach naturalistic. Louise Bourgeois' sleeping figure, number 2, on the other hand, is abstract. This work, part of a series of sculptures that the artist called personages, simplifies and distorts its subject. Bourgeois began with the image of a body as observed in nature. She then abstracted the form of the body, reducing it to a slender vertical column toppled by an egg-shaped torso and a conical head. The arms to either side became elongated to look like spears. The abstracted sculpture communicates the essence of the body without needing to depict it as the figure would appear in our eyes in real life. It is nevertheless representational, as we can see the likeness, even if it takes a little help. Bourgeois relied on this for her series of characters in an imagined world. She often displayed her abstract personages in pairs or in groupings, implying a story for them. Looking at art. Representational art can be naturalistic, abstract, or stylized. Now, let's talk about stylistic approach. This is a woodcut by the 18th century Japanese artist Kitagawa Utamaro, and it illustrates the relationship between individual style and period style. Utamaro worked in the Edo period, when upholding conventions or rules of form was highly valued. Utamaro compiled and depicted the women in his woodcut with thin, elegant bodies, defined by delicate contour lines and flat colors. They appear against an undescribed background or setting. Like other Edo period artists, Utamaro added text to his image. The calligraphy in the upper right corner identifies the subject, and the artist's signature appears at the bottom left. While most of the form upholds the period's stylistic conventions, Utamaro introduced his personal style by rejecting the standard poses and choosing to represent a fleeting moment as the hair begins to fall from the comb. Idealized women in Utamaro's woodcuts are types, not recognizable individuals. Their faces are generic. Their bodies are elongated and languid rather than natural. Utamaro used the stylized approach of the time. Stylized describes representational art that conforms to a preset style or a set of conventions for depicting the world. Utamaro's stylized women conform to his community's conventions for representing figures, elegant and flat, with little descriptive detail. Looking at art. Non-representational or non-objective art does not represent things in the world. Non-representational art values form and material over content. Not all art is representational of something else. So, as we look at art, some works are non-representational. So instead of in, imitating or interpreting the appearance, art conveys the meaning and expressive power through the elements of the art itself, in line, shape, form, and color. It explores materials and what they can do. It might even move or interact with the space where it is displayed. Non-representational art has no story or characters and does not represent anything that we might find around us. For this reason, it is the most difficult art for people to understand. Tara Donovan's non-representational art uses ordinary objects that she gathers together and installs in groupings. She has piled transparent plastic buttons over ceilings with an undulating blanket of styrofoam cups and stacked wooden toothpicks into a 3-foot tall cube. In each case, she drew our attention to the visual character of the material. Her chosen material in Untitled is shiny mylar, which she scrolled and gathered into spheres. She then joined the spheres in a way that suggests the sculpture grew by itself and might continue to grow. The organization of the spheres is different each time Donovan installs the work in a new space, in response to the shape of the space and the location itself. The work has no title. There is not supposed to be anything particularly that we see in it. It has no figures and no setting or no story. However, it does not mean that the art lacks ideas and purpose. Donovan wants us to look at the materials, at the algorithm of the common items, and at the unusual ways that she has displayed them together. Understanding art. Art always has meaning, even if it is non-representational. Meaning in art includes what it is made of, how it is made, what it represents, where it is located, who made it, and why it was made. Viewers contribute to meaning through interpretation. Understanding art. Interpretation includes analyzing materials and techniques which artists select for specific purposes and effects. When we look at a work of art, we cannot help but see what it is made of, the materials itself. Otherwise, we wouldn't see the art at all. The technique used to manipulate those materials into forms of art are sometimes harder to see. As we seek to understand a work of art, materials and techniques are a good place to start. They tell us what the artists work with. They also reveal some of the first decisions that the artists had to make as part of their creative process. The bronze material and Meta Warwick Fuller selected for this talking skull piece is not like mylar. Bronze is very heavy and durable, with a rich color that changes over time. The casting technique for making a bronze sculpture requires a model shaped from clay. Fuller manipulated this raw material to convey emotion, bending the figure's body towards the skull and tilting the head slightly to the side. The clay model that became the mold for the heated bronze also revealed the movement of Fuller's hands. Even in the bronze casting, we can see the impressions of her fingers as she pinched and shaped the clay to form the figure's back and arms and legs. Fuller had learned about casting bronze when she was a student at the Pennsylvania Museum and School for Industrial Art in the 1890s, where she studied for 3 years, also in Paris, and spent times with the bronze sculptor Auguste Rodin. Like his work, Fuller's sculpture is meant to be seen from all sides and invites us to walk around it and appreciate its interpretation of the African folktale from different angles. While Meta Warwick Fuller sculpted with a material known for its weight and permanence, the weavers of the Chumayo feathered tunic chose one of the lightest and most ephemeral materials. Atop a sheet of cotton cloth, the artist attached thousands of feathers, creating a design of felines and birds with a non-representational border. The work was time-consuming and exacting. The weaver did not simply select feathers from birds in the arid local environment of northern Peru, but chose brightly colored feathers from macaws and toucans and other birds found in distant rainforest. Transporting the feathers to the weavers' community was expensive and relied on a trade network of the powerful Chimu people established throughout the region. Only the wealthiest members of the population could afford a tunic like this. Wearing this garment with its luxury material was therefore a statement of social status. Its owner even had himself buried in it. Understanding art. Interpretation includes analyzing form and its visual effects. All right, we're going to get into how to interpret works of art in a formal way, but first let's talk about what form is. So when we look at the material that a work of art is made of, it doesn't usually appear in its raw or unformed state. Artists use appropriate techniques to manipulate it into the final form. When Warwick Fuller used casting to shape her bronze and the Chimu weaver attached the feathers, they had the appearance of the final work in mind. That appearance may have been shaped by preliminary sketches, as the artist considers what their finished objects would look like. Would it be natural or abstract, colorful or muted, symmetrical or asymmetrical, organic and flowing, or rectilinear and rigid? We call this appearance form, and it accounts for everything the eye registers about the art, such as colors, light and shadow, lines, shapes, and internal organization. Regardless of whether it is representational, abstract, or non-representational, all art has form, sometimes called its visual language, for using a vocabulary of visual elements to communicate. As we look at art, understanding its form helps us to appreciate meaning, much like reading its words helps us to understand a book. The last work that we looked at was also titled Adoration of the Shepherds. It was by a different painter, Gorgoni. What we're looking at now is El Greco's version of Adoration of a Shepherd. And here we can see that both paintings have the same content, but they don't share the same form. They're approached in two very distinctive ways. Let's look at the way El Greco approaches form. There are many long and wavy lines, some made by the figures, huge cloaks and elongated limbs. The space is compact and the setting is unclear, with the clouds hovering before a doorway in the background. The only light in the painting shines from the infant's body and illuminates the figures. The deep shadows almost seem to dance, as if the glow was a flame. The painting is organized around the infant in the center of a swirling vortex of limbs, clothing, and darkness. The form of El Greco's painting might make you uneasy or feel otherworldly, which suggests that the artist wanted his viewers to see a spiritual event. Understanding art. The form of a work of art reflects the artist's style. How does the form in this work of art reflect the artist's style? And how does the form in this work of art reflect the artist's style? And once again, looking at the Adoration of the Shepherds by Gorgoni. This is a representational painting, and it represents things found in the world. Human figures, trees, rocks, bushes, all in a naturalistic way. They look like they do in nature. But before we look at these objects as humans and trees and rocks and bushes, let's look at the painting for its form. The colors, brown and green, appear throughout the painting, in the trees and in the ground. We see blue more sporadically. First in the woman's cloak in the corner, and then again at the opposite corner in the sky. The colors change to suggest that some parts of the scene are well lit and others are not. We see this clearly in the shadowy folds and the bright highlights of the blue cloak. The artist organized the painting with figures gathered on the right side and an open space to the left. A line running down the rocks and through the two men at the center seems to divide the image. A cave opening on the right creates an inverted U shape of darkness, while the area between the trees has an upright U shape with hazy light. And again comparing, how does form reflect the artistic style? Understanding art. Eras, or styles, are used as a framework for organizing art history. Eras, or styles, are used as a framework for organizing art history. Understanding art. Interpretation includes analyzing content or subject matter. Interpretation includes analyzing content or subject matter. So let's take a look at what we define as content. Content is what the work of art is about. For representational and abstract work, content begins with the objects or events the work depicts, its subject matter. Sometimes the work's title tells us its content. The paintings by Giorgiano and El Greco share the same title, Adoration of the Shepherds. Created within a century of each other, both paintings represent a passage from the biblical Gospel of Luke and picture the shepherds. Visit down to the newborn's infant Jesus. Exploring the content a little deeper, we find other recognizable characters, Mary, Joseph, and angels. Understanding content requires looking carefully and slowly at a work of art. In Rachel Rouché's Still Life with Flowers, this work we're looking at here, as the title suggests, a painting of a flower arrangement, it is an example of a content category or genre of art known as still life. Still life images were popular in the 17th century, especially in the Netherlands, where Rouché painted. They depict groupings of flowers, tableware, and foods in various states of preparation, all thoughtfully arranged to highlight their colors and textures. Rouché used flowers, but other artists chose fish, bread, fruits, vegetables, cheese, knives, goblets, and decorative shells. Even bugs and cats appear in some still life paintings. Understanding art. Iconography is the study of symbols used to interpret content. Iconography is the study of symbols used to interpret content. While the subject matter of Rouché's still life is at one level straightforward, there is a second, deeper layer of meaning. The wilting flowers and leaves are symbols for the passage of time. They are subtle reminders that time is fleeting. This kind of interpretation of symbols is called iconography. It literally means describing images, which involves identifying, describing, and interpreting subject matter in art. Iconography is based on knowledge of ideas, text, and images created in a particular time and place. Iconography helps us to understand meaning that we might not be able to see for ourselves. For example, unless you have studied Japanese Buddhism, you might not recognize the subject matter of Amida Buddha. To understand the content of this work, we must first read the parts of the image that help us to identify it. Just like the wilting flowers, these signs or symbols are also called iconography. They help us to determine the sculpture's full meaning. Understanding art. Interpretation includes analyzing context and function. Interpretation includes analyzing context and function. How might you analyze the context and function of this artwork? Interpretation includes analyzing context and function. How does understanding the context and function of this art help us to interpret its meaning? Let's consider the photograph of the Amida Buddha. It was taken by a museum, which today is a common setting for encounters with art. Yet the vast majority of humankind's artistic heritage was not created with museums in mind. The personal, social, cultural, and historical settings in which art was created, received, and interpreted form the context of that work of art. So far, we've explored various insights that context has to offer when looking at art. We considered how the Dene sand painting was used in a healing ceremony. And we discussed how the Virgin of Immaculate Conception was informed by colonization and trade and export items. The museum, a building housing a collection of art open to the public, developed in Europe during the decades leading into the 19th century. The same decades that witnessed the social upheavals that inaugurated our modern era, including the American and French revolutions. The Louvre Museum in Paris, where the Mona Lisa hangs today, was originally a royal palace. Its walls and ceilings were decorated with paintings and sculptures that celebrated the monarchy, and its enormous rooms were filled with art from antiquity to the present. After the French Revolution, the palace became a public museum, allowing visitors to see the vast royal art collection. In other nations, former palaces and buildings that served specific functions turned into museums, displaying art previously belonging to the aristocracy, the church, or past civilizations such as ancient Rome and Egypt. All of these objects had been removed from their original context. The object shown here, a fennel, portrays a work of art which we might see in a museum today. It's isolated against a dark background here, and it's well lit and well placed. You can see the gilded carvings of the two figures standing next to a beautiful spider web which gleams. We can admire the harmony of the sculpture's gently rounded forms, but the sculpture was not made primarily to be looked at in this way. In fact, it was not made to be seen in a museum at all. Fennels are actually the ends of a staff piece that is carried by an important person in the culture, and it denotes the office which they carry. The end of chapter 2.